So next I'd like to invite Vladimir Mykov, the president of the Russian Association for Transpersonal Psychology and Psychotherapy, to come up and introduce our keynote speaker, Stan Grof.
Dear colleagues and friends, it's a great pleasure to be here, and it's a great honor for me to introduce one of the greatest scientists and visionaries of modern era, who as nobody else manifested the zeitgeist of the transpersonal. I first met Stan Grof in 1980 in the Soviet Union, but it was indirectly, of course, through his book Realms of Human Unconsciousness. When I got this book, I started reading it in the evening and couldn't put it down until I finished it in the next morning. I was 24, and for me it was first time in my life I was introduced to the most powerful insights into the nature of human psyche and its evolution. And this is the reason why I'm a transpersonalist. Like many other Russians who've read Grof's books published unofficially by Samizdat, underground private publishings, I never dreamed that the time would come and I would see him in live. But the dreams came true when Stan and Christina Grof visited Russia after Perestroika in April 1989. They introduced holotropic breathwork and the whole realm of non-ordinary states of consciousness. And I've seen how 100 excited people greeted the Grofs and asked signatures of the Samizdat copies of Stan's book. When in 2001 Stan and Christina visited Russia again to give keynote speech at 10th conference of European Association of Psychotherapy and to lead the panel of transpersonal psychotherapy, almost half of the conference, around 500 people, went to the panel, while the other half of the attendees spread over the 40 other panels. This is how great the Grofs are received in Europe and in Russia. I had a great privilege to complete Grof transpersonal training with Christina and Stan in 1993 and serve as a channel for the transpersonal in Russia and ex-Soviet Union through publication, all Russian edition of the book. Around 20 books were published, and now the new one about Hans Rudi Giger will be published soon, and also through seminars, conferences, and professional education. Stan, I'm sure, is one of the, not only one of the founders of the whole transpersonal field, as we know, and International Transpersonal Association, science and visionary, who dedicated over 57 years to the study of non-ordinary states of consciousness. And what's for me even more important, he is a man of great heart, true compassion, and unlimited wisdom. He is really a holy grail of the transpersonal. Please meet Stan Grof.
If you don't mind, I ask if I can sit. Yeah. So maybe we can sort of arrange the angle here. It's not just a geriatric request. I will be 83 this year, but I had a back operation and followed by a car accident. So it's just for me much more comfortable to do it this way. Okay, can you hear?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Volodya, thank you so much for that wonderful, wonderful introduction. Although when something like this happens, I feel ambivalent because it creates such expectations that it's not easy to live up to them. So I will do my best. And if I should somehow return the favor, say something about Volodya, I would lose much of the time of my talk this morning. He has done some amazing work in Russia. He really basically brought the transversal ideas. He managed translation of some of the most important books. He has participated in media, in movies. So we're very, very grateful, Volodya, for what you have done. And I would also like to thank for this invitation. It's great to see the different organizations with transpersonal orientation to come together. Christine and I always hope that the transpersonal movement will not have to go through all the other depth psychologies went to, the splits in psychoanalysis and psychosynthesis and other areas. So it's great to see people coming together. I had a PowerPoint presentation for this lecture, and I found out there is no LCD available. So I will try to do my best without the pictures that I wanted to show you. I would like to start in a way that's somewhat unusual, in that I would like to ask you a couple of questions. Please don't raise your hands until I finish this kind of a list that I would like to tell you. How many of you experience in your own life some powerful, non-ordinary states of consciousness? Doesn't have to be psychedelics, could be some powerful form of psychotherapy, spiritual practice. Some people have powerful experiences during sports, near-death experiences, or experiences that just happen. You don't ask for them, you don't do anything to induce them. You might be even fighting them and they happen anyway. So can I see the hands? Okay. This is a somewhat self-selected audience. We get this kind of response anywhere where we go. How many of you have experienced the holotropic breathwork that Christina and I developed? Also quite a few. Now the reason I'm asking this question before my talks is because what I talk about is drawn on research of non-ordinary states of consciousness. And it's much easier to relate to that material if you had some personal experiences that you can refer this material to. Now I have so far talked about non-ordinary experiences, but my interest all these years, over half a century, has been a very important particular subgroup, large subgroup of non-ordinary experiences, which have, according to my experience, healing potential, they have transformative potential, they have even evolutionary potential, and they have what we call heuristic potential. In other words, when we work with these states, we can find some revolutionary new insights about consciousness, about the human psyche, about emotional psychosomatic disorders, about the strategy of self-exploration and psychotherapy and so on. And I was astounded that current psychology and psychiatry does not have a special name for this category. We actually use a term, altered states of consciousness, coined by my friend Charlie Tart, but I really dislike that term, and I know that many of my friends who did consciousness research are trying to avoid that term because it sounds pejorative. The idea that there is a way of correctly experiencing ourselves and the world, and that in these states it's altered, it's kind of distorted. I always think about veterinary medicine, I will get my cat altered, or my dog altered. So I have too much respect for these states to call them altered. And there was simply no other term. We don't have a category mystical experience, spiritual experience. People get diagnoses, and a pretty serious diagnosis for having these experiences. So I decided to coin that term myself, and I started calling them holotropic. Holos means whole, and trepein means moving towards something, moving in the direction of something. Like heliotropism is the property of the plant to orient itself, to move towards the sun. So holotropic means moving toward wholeness. Very frequently when I mention that in our culture, they say, what do you mean moving toward wholeness? Aren't we whole already, the way we operate in everyday life? And I would have to say no. You know, we experience only a small fraction of our total identity as long as we are in the everyday, ordinary state of consciousness. And I usually point out to Hindu religion. In the Hindu religion, you would hear, we are not nama rupa, we are not name and shape. Our true identity is with a core of, or with a spark of cosmic creative energy that we carry in our innermost core of our being. And the Hindus would call it Atman. And this is not a belief or delusion in the Hindu culture. They would give you specific procedures, practices, and if you pursue them, you have a chance to have an experience that would validate it. This is something that each of us can experience. And when we have that experience, we realize that that energy is identical with the energy that created the universe. So our true identity, according to the Hindus, is Atman Brahman. And the work with holotropic states really brings experiential validation for this. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that this is the way things are, but it's a very, very good worldview. It's a great perspective on existence that emerges, and it's very coherent. It's now getting to be as coherent as the materialistic worldview seemed to be. And if we look at it, the materialistic worldview is just another story. I mean, when we get these descriptions of where the universe came from, you know, the singularity 13.4 billion years ago, and out of it comes time and space and all the matter for the billions of galaxies. It's not a down-to-earth, sober, rational explanation, you know, a very, very important problem. So what emerged out of these holotropic states is an alternative understanding of who we are, what it is all about, that's very coherent, that's very consistent, and like the materialistic worldview seems to be supported by our everyday experiences. This alternative, what Aldous Huxley called perennial philosophy, can be systematically validated if we experiment responsibly with these holotropic states. So if in the Upanishad you read, who are we, who am I, the answer is Tattvam Asi, thou art that. You are it with a capital I. Your true identity is divine, it's not bestial. We're not just sort of highly developed animals. We also have this kind of a divine nature which we can discover in this kind of exploration. Teilhard said, we are not human beings having spiritual experiences, we are spiritual beings having human experiences. Now this idea of the essential identity of the individual with the divine is really at the mystical core. It is a secret sort of mystical core of all major religions. So you find these kinds of statements in the mystical branches of all religions. Now, I was myself introduced to these holotropic states when, as a beginning psychiatrist, I volunteered for a LSD session, which in my case was also combined with a powerful stroboscopic light. My preceptor was interested in EEG, and he was particularly interested how you can drive or entrain brainwaves by exposing people to powerful stroboscopic light. So as my experience was culminating, I was exposed to this stroboscope, and this became just a life-transforming experience for me. I lost consciousness, my consciousness left my body. I lost the clinic, I lost the planet. I had the feeling of being exterminated, of ceasing to exist, becoming nothing, but at the same time, I had the feeling that I became all of existence. And then when I was coming down, as this experiment was ending, I found the planet again, I found the clinic, I found my body, but for a long time it was difficult for me to align my consciousness with my body. And it became clear to me that consciousness is not what they taught me, which is like a product of the brain, that consciousness is a cosmic phenomenon. It's much, much larger than the brain ever could be. And I saw that it would be easier to explain the experience of the material world from consciousness as what we call now virtual reality, than it would be to explain how consciousness could be generated by matter. I was, at the time when this happened, I was in a kind of identity crisis. I went to study psychiatry because I read Freud. And at the time when I had the psychedelic session, my excitement about Freud started sort of subsiding. I was still excited about the theory, but I was realizing that this is something that takes years, takes a lot of money, energy, and I was realizing that the results were not exactly breathtaking. I had 7 years of psychoanalysis myself, 3 times a week, a lot of money, a lot of investment. And if you ask me, did it change you? I say, well, I changed, but 7 years, it's a long time, you change anyway. And there was no convincing evidence for me that what the changes that happened in me had anything to do with the free associations that I was doing on the couch. And don't misunderstand me, I loved every moment of it. I loved to play with my dreams and finding there was meaning in each slip of the tongue. But if I compare it with what happened in that one day in the LSD session, I was one person walking into that room in the morning, and I was another person walking out in the evening, and there was absolutely no question in my mind why it happened, what it was related to. So I came down from the session extremely excited. Here I was stuck with psychiatry, and I felt when you're a psychiatrist, this is by far the most interesting thing you can do, is to study these what I call now holotropic states of consciousness. So I spent about half of the time doing psychedelic research, clinical research in Prague, and then later in the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center. And then I went to Esselen, and Christina and I developed the holotropic breathwork, where you can induce similar kinds of states with faster breathing, with music, with body work. And then over the years we also worked with a number of people who had what we call now spiritual emergencies, which is opening of the psyche, usually with powerful spiritual experiences that happens spontaneously without any pharmacological or other kind of help. And we found out that you can work with these people in the same way in which you would work in psychedelic sessions or holotropic states. And that this is a very powerful alternative to the present approach, which is simply suppressing medication and stopping all the process. We came to the conclusion that this is a potentially transformative healing process, evolutionary process, that should be supported, that should not be blocked. I also spent a lot of time with anthropologists and shamans and various spiritual teachers and parapsychologists and psychics and thanatologists and people who were near-death situations. We also had a large study where we used psychedelic sessions with cancer patients as a preparation for dying. And during this research, I ran into basically daily observations that were paradigm challenging, that could not be explained by psychology, by psychiatry, the way we have it now. And what I would like to try to do today is what I did in last paper in the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology, which I call legacy paper, basically summarizing the observations and the experiences from this half a century of study of these holotropic states, and discuss what the implications would be for psychiatry, psychology, psychotherapy. I'm aware that this is a highly controversial area, but you know, in my age, I can afford it. I will just put out the whole vision. You will see that not much will be left of psychiatry and psychology as we know it. But it's not just my own work, but following the work of all kinds of transpersonal colleagues all over the world, I am just absolutely convinced that these are changes that should be made in psychology and psychiatry to make it more effective. This kind of this reminiscences started when I was approaching my 70th birthday, and I got a call from Jane Bunker, who was my editor at SUNY Press, that published quite a few of my books. And she said, Stan, we publish different books on different aspects of your work. Would you consider writing one book that would kind of bring it together, and it would be like a introduction to all the other books? And then there was a long break, and then she said, and would you try to focus specifically on those observations that current psychiatry and psychology cannot explain? Okay? And then there was an even longer break, and she said, and would we try to just sketch out what psychology and psychiatry would look like if you introduce all these observations and incorporate them? So as you can see, this was a tall order, but I was very excited because I was at the time considering retiring, at least partially, and do some more writing and reading. And we had the holotropic breathwork training happening all over the world. There was a whole new line of trainers, and we needed a text, the material that we teach. And this was an offer to make a manual for us. So I wrote the book, and I gave it a deliberately provocative title, Psychology of the Future. Now, if you write books like Beyond the Brain or The Holotropic Mind, you know, people can take it or leave it. If you say this is psychology of the future, people will listen. They either get excited or they get pissed. They think, how dare you? Who do you think you are? So this book is called Psychology of the Future, and behind most of the chapters there is a book. So in a sense, the chapters are kind of summaries of what you find in the book. So if you get interested in a particular topic, there is a book behind it. So I try now to summarize, you see, what the changes according to my observations should be. Now the first major change would be to expand vastly the cartography of the psyche that we have. What we are using in mainstream psychiatry is limited to postnatal biography. Freud said, the newborn is a tabula rasa, it's a clean slate. There's nothing there, including birth itself, that would be of interest for a psychologist as a psychiatrist. So all the interpretations, all the understanding, all the therapeutic approaches with this kind of orientation are focused on postnatal biography. If you work with holotropic states, you have to expand it vastly. First of all, there is a very powerful representation of the birth experience, of the birth trauma. Vast domain with tremendous emotional charge, with a lot of records of very painful physical sensations that were associated with birth. And when I worked with people who regressed to childhood, I found out that the experiences break into 4 kind of experiential clusters or constellations, and I call them basic perinatal matrices. Now these basic perinatal matrices are experiences that we had in the different stages of birth, but there are more than that. They also represent, each of them, a specific opening into the next vast domain that we now call transpersonal. So transpersonal experiences would be experiences in which I would experience oneness with another person. I would experience consciousness of a group of people. I can identify with all of humanity. I can have experiential identification with different animals, with plants even inorganic. It's possible to experience the consciousness of granite, the consciousness of a diamond, and so on. So if you work with holotropic states, you need a really large cartography of the psyche, in which everything that we experience as an object in everyday life can experience or has a representation as a subjective experience. It's very much like in the great Eastern philosophies, where we talk about absolute consciousness. Everything is conscious. Everything is consciousness. Then there are also experiences, transpersonal experiences that take us back into the past, to other centuries, to other cultures, sometimes with the sense of personal remembering, that we call them past life experiences. Again, very, very important category of experiences, but sometimes the authenticity can be, in certain cases, actually confirmed. And if it's not specifically the event that's being described, then there is an amazing insight that the person who has past life experience gets into the culture of that time, the costumes, the weapons, the architecture of the time. That goes way beyond the intellectual knowledge which they have. So there's a way of learning about the universe and its history, not just by observing things and analyzing things, but also by becoming different aspects of the universe in these holotropic states. So that's a large map of the psyche. It also indicates something else that would come as a surprise to many people in academic circles, and that is that consciousness is not a product of the brain, but something much, much larger. It's a cosmic phenomenon. Jung talked about anima mundi. So we have actually absolutely no proof in psychiatry and psychology that consciousness is coming from the brain, which seems to be a kind of a basic metaphysical assumption of materialistic science. What we have is we have close correlations between anatomy, physiology, biochemistry of the brain, and states of consciousness. But this is in no way proof that consciousness is actually coming out of the body, out of the brain. It would be like saying that because there is a correlation between the components of the television set and the program, the quality of the sound and the picture, and that depends specifically on components in the box. All it says that there is a correlation there. It has nothing to do with the problem of where the program is coming from. If we study all the components in the television, we will not understand why at 7 o'clock there's a Mickey Mouse cartoon or Star Trek. So all the observations that we have about these correlations indicate the connection between the brain and consciousness, but leave open the possibility that the brain mediates consciousness systematically. It does not generate it. And as you know, we have now in transpersonal psychology a lot of direct proofs for that. The most obvious that you all know is the area of near-death experiences, where people, including blind people, at the time when they experience near death and the consciousness leaves the body, they can see the environment, they can observe it from the ceiling, they can travel to other parts of the building or rise above it and see the environment. They can experience things that are happening thousands of miles away. If we have an open-minded researcher, it's possible to confirm that these things were actually happening. These were not visions of these people. So that's another category where we would have to radically change our understanding. So the consciousness would not be seen as a product of the brain, but something that's significantly connected with the brain, it's mediated certainly by the brain. And the human psyche is not limited to postnatal biography and the Freudian individual unconscious, but in a sense is commensurate with all there is. And we get our sort of individual selection from them, something that's teased out of this large cosmic fabric, and the boundaries between our perceptual field and this large cosmic field are not absolute, they are negotiable, they can be transcended in these states. Now the next category where we would have to change radically our thinking is about emotional and psychosomatic problems, disorders that are not organic. We're not talking Alzheimer or temporal tumor or the progressive paralysis and so on. We're talking about those emotional psychosomatic disorders where we cannot find a biological cause, that sort of functional or psychogenic, as we call it. Now, in current mainstream psychiatry, there's the idea if something is not organic, it started sometime after we were born, in different periods of our life. And you know that, for example, Freud and his followers created this kind of dynamic taxonomy of emotional disorders, where you can link them to stages of the libido development and stages of the relationship, the development of object relationships. So alcoholism, drug addiction, manic depressive disorders would be seen as oral. Obsessive compulsive neurosis in classical psychoanalysis would be seen as related to anal fixation. The problems for anxiety hysteria, which are the different phobias or conversion hysteria, started when we were about 4 years old in connection with some sexual traumas. Now, if you work with holotropic states, you will find many of these kinds of things described in psychoanalysis, but the problem is that it's related only to a very superficial layer in the psyche. If you have a method like psychedelics or breathwork, rebirthing, or if your psyche is activated spontaneously, like in spiritual emergency, the experiences will not stay in the biographical realm. You'll find out that if you look for deeper roots of the problems, they will be in one of the perinatal matrices. There would be some emotions and some important physical feelings that are fed into the symptoms from the perinatal level, and then you'll find even deeper roots that will take you to something like past life experiences or some archetypal motifs or even phylogenetic motifs. So behind emotional and psychosomatic symptoms, there are layered constellations of memories, some of them coming from different periods of postnatal life, some from one of the birth matrices, and some of them all the way from the transpersonal realm. And to work effectively with these problems, we have to allow ourselves to go to all the layers from which the symptoms are kind of nourished. Now this seems like very bad news. You know, we thought all we have to do is some work on infancy and childhood and it's going to be fine. And here the playground is the whole universe. But the good news is that if we work with holotropic states, we discover very powerful and by mainstream psychiatry unrecognized healing mechanisms of profound transformation, of spiritual opening and so on. So a lot of problems can be at least alleviated, if not resolved, by working through the birth trauma, bringing the emotions, bringing the physical sensations and expressing them and integrating that material. There are very powerful healing mechanisms connected to past life experiences. I've seen many situations of phobias, of deep depression, of psychosomatic pains of various kinds, migraine headaches, pains in the body and so on, that we worked on, and the ultimate solution came in connection with a past life, reliving of what seemed to be a past life experience. So there is this, healing potential on many different levels of the unconscious, and some of them we simply have not been using in traditional psychiatry and psychotherapy. I'll just give you quickly examples of what I mean. I talk about these constellations, underlying symptoms, as coexistent systems of condensed experience. So let's say somebody can have asthma, psychogenic asthma, and there would be behind it experience of near drowning when they were 14, experience of being repeatedly strangled by an older sibling at the age of 4, very serious whooping cough or diphtheria, it's choking, at the age of 2. Then connection to a difficult situation in birth where maybe the shoulder was trapped behind the pubic bone of the mother, and then at the depth would be a past life experience that involves strangling, hanging, and so on. Another quick one, there was a man who had serious pain, chronic pain, no organic finding, no medical help to speak of, and found behind it a coexistent where he was from Australia. When he was 7 years old, they were digging a tunnel on the beach. He sort of went in, and the kids were jumping, and it buried him, and he almost died. They just got him in the last moment. Then there was experience of being stuck in the birth canal, and then on a deeper level, he was in a battle riding a horse and was hit by a lancet and fell down, and the horses sort of ran over him and killed him, crushed him. So when he managed to work through all these levels of experiences, there was no more pain, and we became friends, and we had seen him for years afterwards, and the pain never came back. Okay, I will just mention one more thing, really important thing, and that's the strategy of self-exploration and therapy. Now, as you know, we have enormous number of schools, and each school will tell you something different about what are the most important motivating forces in the psyche. Why do symptoms develop? What they mean. And each of those techniques, each of those schools will give you a different technique, and each them would present it as a kind of method of choice, scientific approach to this particular problem. Now, but can you imagine the differences? You take a phobia to a behaviorist and then to a psychoanalyst, and then you continue and give it to therapists who initially were inspired by Freud, but now develop their own schools and see things differently. So basically, the way it is now, you can flip a coin and you can choose a school, and with each school comes a different explanation what's wrong with you and different suggestions as to what you should what you should do about it. Now, what's important in many psychotherapeutic approaches is interpretation, where you interpret what is coming up. I remember in my own analysis, very frequently saying something and then hearing from the analyst, well, that's what you think it is, but according to psychoanalysis, this is, I got a different kind of explanation. Now the problem is that had I had a therapist with different orientation, I would have gotten different interpretations. So interpretation cannot be really the major vehicle here. You see, if this were the case, then the therapeutic results of therapeutic schools would have to be distributed on a curve, where some of the schools would have the most accurate understanding of the psyche and give the most appropriate interpretations, and the others would be distributed on the descending part of that curve, depending on how much their understanding sort of deviates from the understanding. Just a quick example. I had an analyst who was really orthodox Freudian, and he used to say, there's nothing that psychoanalysts cannot explain in the psyche. There are only things that psychoanalysts cannot explain. And he was a kind of, I wanted to say elderly gentleman. He was probably 10 years younger than I am now. But it was known about him that once in a while he would doze off. You free associate, and you have to try to do something to bring him back into the process. And there were about 7 of us, psychiatrists of the same age, working with him, and we knew this, we were making jokes about it, and we also were meeting in seminars where we could ask questions. And so one of the questions that came up was, what happens when a psychoanalyst falls asleep? If I keep free associating, does therapy continue? Is the process interrupted? Should you get refunded because money is important? He was also a great admirer of Ivan Petrovich Pavlov, who got the Nobel Prize for the conditioned reflexes in dogs. And Pavlov talks a lot about the inhibition of the cortex, and that when that happens, you can have a waking point, like in hypnosis, for example. The cortex is inhibited, but there is a waking point. And Pavlov's favorite example is a mother who could sleep through heavy noises, but wakes up when her own child is moaning. And so his response to our question was, well, it can happen, Sometimes you're tired, you're recovering from a flu, you didn't sleep enough. Yeah, it can happen. But if you work in this business for a long time, you develop this sixth sense. You fall asleep only when the stuff that's coming up is irrelevant. When something important comes up, you wake up and you're right there. It's relevant by whose judgment, you understand? Different schools would interpret it differently. And we are not generally even sort of upset about it. There are so many different opinions and so many different therapies. And if I'm a beginning psychiatrist, I look at the market and I choose a therapy. For me, it was Freud. Wow, this is where it's at. This is where I'm going to get my training. And then if it doesn't work out, then we go and we get another training and yet another training. So what is the alternative that the holotropic states offers? It's quite interesting. You find out that if you get into non-ordinary states, it kind of mobilizes inner healing intelligence, self-healing intelligence. That means that that state automatically starts bringing to the surface elements from the unconscious that have a very strong emotional charge, but they're also close to the threshold of consciousness, so they are available today for processing. There's some other important and heavily charged problems that will have to wait 3 or 4 sessions before they get into the position towards the threshold of consciousness that they can emerge for processing. So that whole emphasis here shifts now to the client and the self-healing abilities of the client. It's not the brilliant therapist who comes with the right kind of interpretation and sort of throws this there and things will magically change. When we work with these states, whether it's psychedelics or breath work or some, shamanic methods, or working with spiritual emergency, we become more like midwives. The process is already there, and the best we can do is to kind of intelligently support what is happening and not do anything until and unless it gets stuck. Then we do just a little that is necessary to get the process going, and then we step back and let the client or the person in the workshop to do it by themselves. Now we found that this is really a very, very powerful way, although it's not the easiest one. It's not the easiest one for the person who is experiencing it and for the facilitators. It's much easier to do psychoanalysis the way I was trained. When 55 minutes come, I say, well, okay, we'll continue on Thursday. If you work with holotropic states, the interesting thing is that the psyche brings the material in quantum. The material comes up, culminates, and then it's resolved. And then it's necessary to do things to get the best possible grounding for each of the sessions. But we are not the ones who guide the session. We just sort of we support it. Okay, I think these are the most important things. I don't want to open a can of worms this time. I have done now work with Rick Tarnas. How many of you know Rick Tarnas? Okay, for 30 years we have been following the astrological correlations of these non-ordinary states of consciousness. And we found out that this is the only tool that we were able to come up that can predict what kind of experiences people will have when they take a psychedelic session, or when they do a holotropic breathwork, or what would be the transits, the planetary transits at the time when they are going through a spiritual crisis, a spiritual emergency. We have never seen anybody going through a spiritual crisis who would not have some hard aspects of the 4 outer planets, for example. Now, the way this whole thing happened over 30 years ago, when Rick came to Esalen, was asking me to be on his dissertation, which was on LSD psychotherapy, and there was a man who came who was kind of like a walking, ephemeris. He was carrying ephemeris under his arm, and he was just correlating everything that was happening in his life and around him with planetary transits. And he said, you guys, if you work with non-ordinary states or holotropic states, why don't you use astrology? Astrology should be like a perfect tool for this. And astrology was still too much for both of us, although we had done by then, our share of inner experiences, and I was open to acupuncture and I Ching and things like that. But we said, what is there to lose? So we decided to look into it. We learned from him how to cast a chart. At that time, it was quite a job. Now you can just push a button on the computer. And Esalen is like this incredible human laboratory. A lot of people having Gestalt sessions, holotropic breathwork session, somebody, a psychedelic session on the side, somebody, spiritual emergency or a breakdown. So we started looking at these correlations, and the first thing that struck us was that what I described as the phenomenology of the 4 perinatal matrices, the experiences related to reliving of the experiences in the different stages of birth, could just as well be paragraphs from a handbook of astrology. How many of you know something about astrology or are interested in astrology? Some. Okay, so if the first one, still have five minutes about, yeah? The first matrix is that the fetus is still in the womb. So this is related to water, it's related to mystical union, oceanic, aquatic kind of experiences, cosmic experiences, dissolution of boundaries. What archetype would that be?
Neptune.
Neptune. Okay, the second matrix is when the uterus is contracting, but the cervix is not open. So it's compression, oppression, depression, starvation, this guilt that comes up.
Saturn.
Heavy pressures, what would that be?
Saturn.
Saturn would be, shadow aspect of Saturn. Then look at the third one. It would, what's involved there is actually the choking creates powerful sexual arousal. So it's related to birth, death, the encounter with death, sex, rebirth, powerful energy, and also elimination, that is biological products there.
Pluto.
Which archetype would cover that? Powerful energies,
Pluto.
Pluto.
birth, sex, death, rebirth. Pluto, okay? Exactly, Pluto. And then we have the fourth one, sudden, unexpected escape or resolution of a difficult situation, breakthrough, rising to new levels of insight, illuminating insight, divine epiphany, light. What would that be? Liberation. Uranus, okay? So this is strange. Why? Something that I got out of the sessions of people who took LSD that are related to stages of birth should be correlated with planetary archetypes. But then the really mind-blowing insight came that people actually would confront experientially these matrices when they have those planets as transiting planets. Transits are represented by the relationship where the planets are now and where they were at the time of your birth. So you have a certain chart for your whole life that shows the archetypal possibilities, and then you have transits as the planets are moving there, creating aspect of figures with the places where your planets were at the time when you were born. So I would just bring to your attention a new journal which is called Archai, about archetypal astrology, which was started by Rick and some of his friends. And also I have on the, I don't have time to go, this is too complex an issue. You can get to my website, which is my full name, stanisalv.com, and there are a couple of papers on how we use astrology, if that's something that you are interested in. Okay, so I will just sort of wrap it up and see that it's a major changes that will have to be done, expanding the cartography so that it would include not just biography, but the perinatal level, and that this vast transpersonal realm, you would find out that consciousness is not a product of the brain, that is mediated through the brain, but not produced by the brain, which really undermines the basic metaphysical assumption of materialistic science. That the roots of emotional, psychosomatic, and interpersonal problems don't just go to infancy and childhood, but they have additional roots on the perinatal level and then the transpersonal level. And then there is an alternative to what we are trying to do in many of the psychotherapies, which is trying to use our intellect to understand how the psyche functions in general and the psyche of our client. The original term therapeutes means not somebody who gets and fixes people, but somebody who intelligently cooperates in the healing process. And then just as a suggestion, if you want to look at the amazing predictive power of astrology, but the predictions are archetypal. They are not concrete. Okay, I believe myself that if we don't introduce these changes, that we will have only a superficial understanding of emotional psychosomatic disorders, that psychiatry will not have really adequate understanding of ritual and spiritual life and religious life of humanity, that we will not adequately understand shamanism, rites of passage, ancient mysteries, or things that happen to people in some intense spiritual practice, the experiences of yogis, of Buddhists of various orientation, of Taoists, of Christian mystics. We really need this kind of an understanding of the psyche. Now, this, if this would be accepted by mainstream circles, this would be the end of transpersonal psychology. We would not need transpersonal psychology. It would just be psychology, only describing the psyche in its true dimensions and its true capacities. We also would not need parapsychology. Parapsychology is there because the current paradigm cannot explain what is happening there. If we work with non-ordinary states, there is extrasensory approach to information about a number of things. I mentioned about other people, about animals, about plants, about history, and so on. So we don't need just to study, telepathy, psychometry, telekinesis, some of the 5 or 6 areas that parapsychology focuses on, because the parapsychological elements would be distributed in the whole psyche. So we just study the psyche that would have the biographical dimension, the perinatal dimension, and the transpersonal dimension, but we don't need specific. So we don't need specific disciplines studying transpersonal phenomena. Like if you are a therapist, you have to have a large enough map so that you can follow the client wherever the client goes, but the material comes from the client, whether it's going to be something about their current life, or whether they're going to be reliving birth, or whether it's going to be something that comes from the transpersonal level. That's determined by the process itself. So anyway, I will end here. Again, I am aware that this is a very, very controversial suggestion, because also of the scope of it. It's not something that you can handle by a little ad hoc hypothesis, by a little patchwork. It really would mean to accept that we have to radically change our thinking about the psyche, about consciousness, to really get better results than we are getting currently. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. If you would like you to hear it or read it in a more articulate way, it's on the larger paper is on my website, again, stanislavgrof.com.